Hello and welcome to our weekly share based on the Torah of the Yeshiva of Kelm. I just got back from England. I have a new grandson, Mazel Tov, you can all say, and a lovely little boy who is now called Shmuel David. So Mazel Tov to me and his mum and dad, and of course to the whole of the family, and particularly to Shmuel David. So it's a little bit late this year arriving this week because it was difficult to do it when I was not in front of my own computer with all my bits and bobs. That's point number one. Point number two, we're about to do our dedications as we normally do for people who need a refuah shalema. So let me remind you again, if you would like to include somebody's name in this and indeed sponsor this little share, then please just get in touch with me at yy@askrabbiyyy.com, yy@askrabbiyyy.com, and it should be a refuah shalema for. Let's try to get my list ready. Rafal Chai Ben Sora. Very, very dear friend of mine. He should continue to have a refuah shalema. And then there is Oria Chaim Ben Chana Yehudis, the little boy waiting for the lung transplant. He should have a refuah shalema as well. To my dear lady wife, yes, David wife, that's right. To Rivka Basima Esther, recovering from her knee transplant operation. Amram Ben Sora is doing well and got out of the hospital and is home. He should continue to have a refuah shalema. Yecheskel Yehuda Ben Yenta should have a refuah shalema. I'm bound to miss one out. No, I think that's all. Did I miss anybody out? I hope not. Okay, let's get to the crux of the share. Now, of course, it's Pashas Vayikra, but as it's Erev Pesach, I think I'm going to swap over to talk about Pesach instead. So I hope that will be useful to you at the Seder table as we progress. There is a mitzvah which is extremely satisfying when you get it right, and extremely upsetting when you get it wrong. And it's the mitzvah of Don Kaskus. Don Kaskus is giving somebody the benefit of the doubt. Now, Don Kaskus, as the Rambam says, has got gedorim. It's got rules attached to it. For example, if you see a Talmud Chacham, and the Talmud Chacham is sitting in a McDonald's, well-known Talmud Chacham, great rabbi, sitting in a McDonald's eating a Big Mac, and he's clearly eating it, and you clearly see him, then you can be Don him Kaskus. You can give him the benefit of the doubt. What doubt? Well, says the Rambam, because he's a Talmud Chacham, you can assume that he has done teshuvah for eating that Big Mac. This incidentally happened to me. Well, I wasn't eating the Big Mac, but many years ago in Manchester, when I was still the campus rabbi there, I was there for a Friday night meal. I gave a talk at the meal, and I stayed behind for about half an hour to talk to the students. And then I began the long 1 hour walk through the city centre of Manchester to get to my home to continue Shabbos in a more conducive atmosphere than in student land, where my family was waiting for me. You had to go along past, it's called the Curry Mile, with all the sort of Indian and Pakistani, Indo-Pak it's called, restaurants where making wonderful food, I am sure, of course, none of it kosher. And because I was half an hour late in starting the journey from discussing things with these students, I walked past a restaurant, and there were 4 other students who had an hour before been sitting listening to me at the Shabbos meal, eating a treif meal. And they saw me because they're right in the window seat, and it was actually very, very funny in a cruel sort of way. One immediately put the menu up to his face. Another one slid underneath the table, literally disappeared. One looked away, and one just looked like a deer in headlights. And I courteously pretended I hadn't seen them. So basically, if you saw Talmud Chacham eating in that restaurant, you can assume he's done tshuva for the next day, because he's a Talmud Chacham, because he's a tzaddik. If you see a bad person, a Rasha, that's a halachic definition for Rasha, which we won't go into here, but just let's assume a really nasty person, and he is doing something good, he's given a large donation to some Jewish hospital or something along those lines, a yeshiva, you can assume he's doing it for a bad reason, even though the act itself might be beneficial, but his motivation is bad. So there are gedorim to the mitzvah of Dona Kaskus. There are rules that apply to the mitzvah of Dona Kaskus, but it's tremendously satisfying when you get it right. And so many times in my life, and I'm kind of guessing yours too, you have seen somebody do something or do something to you when it's absolutely obvious that their intention was malicious and hurtful. Take a simple example. Let's imagine he or she was making a party, and you're supposed to be one of their best friends, and you didn't get invited. So, because you're a normal human being, it is, by the way, all right to be a normal human being. You get very, very hurt. Now, this is what you should do, because there's a mitzvah don l'chaschus, because it's so obvious to you that they just, I think the American expression is they've blown you off. So you go to them and you say the following. The formulation of words is very important. It strikes me, or I think, or maybe, it seems to me that maybe, all those sorts of formulas. You don't say you did this. It's not an accusation, because it's an accusation, as we'll see in a second, and it turns out to be false, then you've completely and probably irrevocably destroyed the relationship. But if your words suggest that you're giving the benefit of the doubt, then you can recover from this situation if your accusation turns out to be wrong. So that's what you say, right? So you say, it seems to me that you did such and such a thing. Now, the response could be one of three. And incidentally, a sefer called Peliotes, he points out, he goes through all the mitzvahs, and he points out that the Torah, the Pesach from which we deduce the prohibition about hating another Jew, sinas chinam, is the Pesach which says, do not hate your brother in your heart. And he questions why it says in your heart instead of just plain old, don't hate your brother or sister. And he says the answer is because if you have a problem with somebody, if you've got a complaint against someone, and you take it to them, as I'll demonstrate in a second, there's a possibility of a resolution and solving the problem. If, however, you smile at them, but you hate them in your heart, then the person doesn't know there's a problem, so he can't come and reconcile with you, or you are not obviously not going to reconcile with them. So here's the thing. You go and you say, as I said before, it seems to me, or I think, perhaps you did such and such. So possibility number one is they turn around, and this is where it gets satisfying, and they say, no, I didn't. No, I didn't. So many times in my life, it just seems obvious, with 100% certainty, that there is no alternative explanation to what I'm upset about, but the one that allowed me to become upset in the first place, my own estimation. And then you find out, because you've done the mitzvah, done the mitzvahs, and you've taken it to them, there was a completely benign explanation. And it might simply be, I was told you're out of town. I'm just giving a simple example, but they're actually, sometimes the stories are so complex and so totally different to the one that you thought was the only explanation. The fact that you embraced the mitzvah and allowed them to make an explanation, you were don l'chaschus, you gave them the benefit of the doubt, that's a very satisfying mitzvah, and you remain friends afterwards. Possibility number two is the person says, no, I did do it. I did do it, but you know what? I've been so ashamed. I regret it so much that I simply haven't been able to bring it to you to apologize. And some people just can't. They're too ashamed to apologize. But the fact, you can see it in their face, their eyes go down, and that you can, people with body language that they're sorry. So they might say, yeah, and I did do it. I'm so ashamed of myself. And then it's perhaps much easier for you to forgive them. Possibility number three is they say, yes, I did do it, and I don't care. In fact, I can hardly wait to have the opportunity to do it to you again. Then that's not called sinas chinam. Somebody slaps you hard in the face and punches you in the nose for no reason whatsoever, or no good reason, then that's not called hating them for no reason. They've given you a legitimate reason to dislike them. But it's an extraordinarily satisfying mitzvah to do. Now, hold on to this idea, because we're going to come back to the mitzvah of don l'chaschus shortly. In the story of the going out from Mitzrayim, there is, of course, a very interesting fact. If we assume a generation is 20 years, and they were there in Mitzrayim for 210 years. Now, as we know, that when they went out from Mitzrayim, only 1/5 went out, and that 1/5 was about 500,000 Jews, 600,000, over 500,000 Jews. That's the males, let alone their wives and their children. Then if you multiply that by 4, you get the number of Jews who were left behind. So we, the inheritors, the children of that generation, passing through, of course, a couple of millennia or so, we are the ones for whom it was a happy ending. But fourth is the Jews, it was not a happy ending at all. They stayed in Egypt and simply got lost. But more than that, it was only that last generation, the generation of the Exodus, who, even if they didn't choose to go out, could have chosen to go out, for that generation, there was the possibility of a happy ending. But the previous generations, so 210 years, so let's make it simple and make it 200 years, which is, if it's 20 years of a generation, so that's 10 generations. So 10 generations of Jews did not go out and had no possibility of getting out and simply merged into Egyptian society and were totally lost. Well, where's the happy ending for them? Why is it such a big celebration? We got out, and yeah, but goodbye 4/5 and goodbye 10 generations of Jews lost. Sounds rather strange. And more than that, and now we come back to the mitzvah of Dom Haskus, of giving people the benefit of the doubt. There's an enormous mistake that people make when it comes to Egypt and the Jews and what happened to those Jews in the process of enslavement in Egypt. And remember, enslavement in Egypt was only the last 80 years. Before then, the doors were flung open and we were welcomed into Egyptian society as part of their strategy to seduce us away from Jewishness and to embrace becoming Egyptians. Here is something which I think will astonish you, and it's because this is the Torah of Kelm. Let's go to, of course, Rabbi Yerucham, Das Chochma Musar, and this is what Rabbi Yerucham has to say. This you'll find if you're interested in the Chelik Aleph of Das Chochma Musar on page Reish Tzadik Aleph in his essay number 92. So he says the following thing: Yirmiyahu Novi, the Novi Yirmiyahu, Jeremiah, writes an entire chapter, that's chapter 10 of Yirmiyahu, of Jeremiah, pointing out and emphasizing the difference. I'm translating this literally. I'll read it to you again. The differences between Hashem and idolatry. Now, those who've been with me in my sharing before will know that idolatry is an extraordinarily complicated topic, an extremely sophisticated system. So sophisticated indeed that apparently it takes one of the greatest Nevi'im of Jewish history to draw a comparison and a contrast to explain the differences between the two, which is what he says here. So basically he says, we tend to think that Avodah Zarah was, crude, primitive, almost caveman stuff. No, it wasn't. It was profoundly sophisticated. It was taking the powers that exist in the universe, things that in today's society we're almost completely unaware of, and being able to take those powers and manipulate them to defy the normal rules of nature, to do incredible things. I'll read a little bit more from Rabbi Yerucham. The truth of the matter is we make a fundamental mistake when it comes to our estimation or understanding of Avodah Zarah. We think it's all silliness. It's all sleight of hand and trickery without any real power. But we've got a whole chapter from the Novi to say there is a difference. If it's so just trickery, it's so easy to expose. Says Rabbi Yerucham that Avodah Zarah is real, or was real, I should say, had enormous powers, could do incredible stuff. That's why you need a Novi to draw the distinction and show you. They could make you rich, they could make you poor, they could make you healthy, they could make you sick, they could kill you. It was incredible stuff. So much so, and this is where I'm going to take you to another Talmud of Kelm, that's Rabbi Dessler, and Rabbi Dessler says the following, and this is the base of Mitzvah Milion, and you'll find this on page 40, and he says the following thing. The Pesach famously says, and we know this because when it's, sorry, I think it's the wrong place, let me just give it, I don't think it is 40, yes, no, 40, but my marker is the wrong place. It's here. Hold on a second. I promise you this is worth waiting for. Yeah, listen to this. As in page 20, well, I just doubled up. I was twice wrong, I suppose. 220s. Listen to this. The Pesach says, "Va'avarti be'eretz Mitzrayim, ani v'lo malach." And he says, "The God, of course, Hashem passes over. I passed over Mitzrayim, me and not an angel. Why not an angel? Why not an angel? Normally, Hashem sends angels to do stuff in this world. Why did he not send an angel? Listen to this. I think the current phrase is, it'll blow your socks off. The Umuva Zohar HaKodesh, the Zohar HaKodesh says, it was necessary for Hashem to pass over the houses and bring the redemption of the Jewish people and the Exodus to the Jewish people himself, in his on his own. Because it would be impossible for an angel to move into the airspace of Egypt without being shot down effectively, being contaminated or even destroyed by the tumah, by the negative forces that existed there. Egypt's mastery of Avodah Zarah, Egypt's ability to draw forces from the universe to defy the physical world also defies the spiritual world. An angel would have been shot down. It's a bit like the Iron Dome system that they have in Israel when terrorist rockets and missiles are coming across from Gaza or from Lebanon. And of course, they fire a missile which knocks them down. They had that, but not knocking down missiles, knocking down spiritual missiles, if you like, which would be an angel. It had to be Hashem himself. That's impressive. That's unbelievable. There is somebody you may have heard of called Uri Geller. Uri Geller is, he's a very, very famous person. He is, I suppose we call it a stage magician, but he claims to have real powers. Many years ago, when I was still the campus rabbi in Liverpool, one of my students was killed in a hit and run by a fellow who was high on drugs. So it was really a murder. But the police only breathalyzed him, as he said laughingly, was overheard laughing about this later, only breathalyzed him from alcohol, not from drugs. So it was a horrible thing. He was a lovely young man. I was very, very fond of him, and he was studying to be a doctor. So the students decided it would be a lovely thing to give an incubator to the hospital which he worked at, Liverpool Royal in Liverpool, and also to Laniado Hospital in Israel. So I was together with them working on this project, and we decided to do a fundraising evening. We're going to have, after Shabbat, after Shabbos, we're going to have an event. And I, through my BBC contacts, was able to get in touch with this famous person, Uri Geller, who can do astonishing things. There's no doubt that he can do astonishing things, and it has that effect on you. One of his tricks is he takes a little envelope, little packet of seeds, snips the corner, pours the seeds in his hands, maybe for flowers or vegetables or whatever, looks at them, and they start to sprout. That's interesting. But he's most famous for bending spoons. I have one here. I don't know if you can see that. It's upside down. Yeah, Uri Geller. He signed the spoon. When he heard that my late wife, Shalom, was not well enough in one of her battles with cancer to get to the show, he said to me, "Do you have any spoons?" Yes, I'm one of these rich Jews. I own spoons. So I brought in 6 spoons, and I lost 6 spoons that night. And he simply looks at them, and then he touches them, and the spoon starts to bend. Incredibly, one of the spoons, he put it down on the table, and it continued to bend until literally it fractured in the middle and broke into 2 pieces, boom, which is quite dramatic to watch. And you get a feeling, wow. So what this is, and he claims all sorts of mystical powers, I don't know, but it has that effect. Idolatry has that effect in people because it is real, or it was real, and they could do astonishing things. To go off more at tangent just for a little bit more, as a general rule that whenever Hashem created something in the world, there's always, when it's taken away, a residue left. Now, when we rebuilt the second temple, because the first temple was destroyed because of our addiction to idolatry, then the rabbis asked for idolatry to be taken away, and it was taken away. There's one place where there's a residue that it still continues, and that is apparently in India. And to pause and interject, the Gemara in Sanhedrin, Kuf Beis on the base, if I remember rightly, says an incredibly interesting story. One of the most famous, or perhaps infamous, Jewish kings was somebody called Menashe Melech Yisrael. Rav Ashi, who was the author of the Talmud, was giving a shiur once, And he concluded the shir by saying, we'll come back to this tomorrow and we'll discuss our colleague, our chaver, Menashe Melech Yisrael. That night, Menashe Melech Yisrael comes to Rav Ashi in a dream and says to him, how dare you speak about me like that? And the interesting thing was that his challenge to him was, because I'm a Talmud Chacham. He knew things in halacha, which Rav Ashi, the author of the Talmud, did not know, and which he demonstrated by asking him a question which he couldn't answer, to which Rav Ashi turned around and said, why, if you knew so much, did you get involved in Avodah Zarah? Of course, this is the period after Avodah Zarah was taken from the world, so we no real concept of this. To which he turned around and replied, you know what, if you'd were there, you'd lift up your garment, the hem of your garment, reach to the floor, past your knees, so you could have run to idolatry, to avoid Zarah. Now, that's a very interesting statement. It means, Rav Ashi, you have a clue what you're talking about, because you live in a world where it doesn't exist. But they say that when Hashem takes something from the world, there's still a residue of it to be found. The residue of it apparently is in India. I remember when I was at Glasgow University, we were shown studying education, we were shown a video of different cultural stuff, and it was in Sri Lanka, just that large island off the east coast of India, and there was a festival of Avodah Zarah, of fakirs, and there was a frame, if you can imagine a frame. So, you know what, do I have a pen and I can draw this for you? Yes, I do. Aha. Wow, this sheer incredible. Somebody talks over microphone. Spontaneous. Right, here is, somebody gave me this. It's very sweet. It's got a drawer for pens. Here's a whiteboard. So basically, there was a frame. This is not a room. I'm trying to draw a frame. Imagine these are metal posts, a bit like a chuppah at that stage, isn't it? And it was attached there. And suspended inside this, or beside for a second, was a fellow. That's meant to be his legs. Fellow like that. Here's his arms. How was he floating in midair? Because there was a wire going from there, this corner, that corner, that corner, and that corner, with meat hooks on them. The meat hooks, you could see this in the video, they put the meat hooks through his calf, both calves, and his shoulder blades. No blood appeared. And then they suspended him from this wire. And this guy was there all day giving brachas, giving blessings to people who came to see him. And apparently it was sort of like the thing to do, the minhag, was to push him so he swayed back and forward like a pendulum. And how does that happen? A residue of Avodah Zarah exists in India. In fact, when I was in Gates of Yeshiva, there was a fellow there called Solomon, if I remember his name. He was an Iraqi Jew. And this fellow Solomon said that he'd been in an Indian village when a fakir turned up. All the men made a circle round about him, and he took one of them out to the middle of the circle. He put him into a trance. He took out a handkerchief, opened the fellow's mouth with a handkerchief around his fingers, pulled out his tongue, and cut off his tongue with a knife. Blood. He then passed the tongue round so people could hold it in their hands, so warm and leaking blood. This fellow, there was a Gesed Yeshiva, said, I held it in my hand. And then it was passed back to the fellow, who put it back in his mouth, did something, I don't know what he did, and suddenly woke him up from the trance, and there was the tongue, perfectly attached, and the fellow having not a clue what would happen. In the world of real Avodah Zarah, that would be nothing. Absolutely nothing. So that's the world of Avodah Zarah, and that was the world of Egypt. Now the question was, what about those generations who were so seduced by these things? So it's not trickery, it's real. It was so seductive that Menashe Melech Yisrael can say to Rav Ashi, you would have run to it. I assume that Menashe Melech Yisrael merely walked to it, but you would have run to it. And therefore, and of course, when the rabbis asked for that to be removed from the world of Avodah Zarah, that's when we lost prophecy, because prophecy was the positive equal of Avodah Zarah. What a prophet, you imagine a prophet could do, look into the future, look into your soul, etc., telling you what's wrong with you spiritually to heal you physically. They could do all that. They could do all that as well. Fine. So what were those generations of people who were lost in Mitzrayim? What were those 210 years? And so there's an incredibly interesting alshach The Alshich says, this is away from Torah's Kelm, obviously. We'll go back there in just a second. When we make the golden calf, then Hashem famously says, go down from the mountain, kishikas amka, because your people have behaved badly. So what do you mean, your people? Sometimes a husband and wife have an argument, and the wife says, you know what your son did? My son? Sorry, my son? Isn't he your son too? Didn't you have anything to do with this boy being on the planet? Didn't you carry him in your womb for 9 months? Didn't you give birth to him? So it sounds like the same sort of thing. Because your people, Hashem says to Moshe, your people have behaved badly. My people? Yes, the Erev Rav. Who made the golden calf? It was the Erev Rav. This large number of non-Jewish people who were so impressed by the miracles of the Exodus, they decided that they wanted to join the Jewish people too. And Moshe Rabbeinu takes them out. Listen to what the Alshich says. This is now he quotes the Gemara, the Medrash in Shmos Rabbah. I'm going to read it to you in a second. You'll see it's slightly different language, but let's see. Hashem el Moshe, Hashem said to Moshe, I told you I had no desire for these people. Who've come out with my sons, with the Jewish people. But Moshe Rabbeinu argued back and says the following thing. But isn't it a good thing to take these lost souls and bring them towards Kedusha? So Hashem says, I didn't want them. The Erev Rav, you brought them out. But isn't that a good thing? Don't you think it's a good thing? Isn't it really what we should be doing is to bring lost souls? So lost souls, he says, because the Nefashos about this, these lost souls, and bring them back to Kedusha. That's the Alshich. Come back to that in a second. Then there is the version of the Medrash Rabbah, slightly different. So I'm just wondering if his Medrash Rabbah is a slightly different version. I'll read to you. This is, you'll find this in Medrash Rabbah in Perik Membes, and it's Vov, Medrash Vov. Lech reid kishekas amcha. Get down, says Hashem to Moshe, because your people have behaved badly. Ha'am inksiv says no, because he doesn't say the people behave badly. He says your people. El amcham. Moshe said, Rabbeinu olam minayin hem ami. They're my people. Omar lo Hakadosh Baruch Hashem said to him, Hu amcho heim sha'at shahoya b'Mitzrayim amarti l'chol. These are the people who, when you were still in Egypt, I said to you, what says he, es tzavoisai es ami, bring out my hosts, the hosts of the Jewish people, ami, my people. Lo amarti l'chol shalola erev bahem erev rav. I didn't say to you should mix up other people with them. To which Moshe replies, continuing, Hashem says, Ato, Yisrael, Onav kosher, because you were an Onav, humble person and very kosher. Amarti, he said to me, shouldn't you always welcome back people who return? Now, the problem with this version of the Medrash is return. So I said to you at the beginning of the share, I just came back from England and Scotland. I had a priest for my grandson, and I had to do some stuff, family business in Scotland. So I could see, maybe I did, I can't remember, the week before I left that year when I was doing this year, I said, I'm going back to Scotland next week. But I'm guessing for a lot of you out there, you could not say that because you've never been there. If I'm going back, it means I've been there before. So here the Medrash says that Moshe's argument is, isn't it? I'll read to you again. Didn't you, Hashem, say that you should always bring back people who are returning? But they'd never been to Eretz Yisrael. They'd never left Egypt before. What do you mean returning? So that's question number one. If we go back to the Alshich, the way he says it, his version is that Moshe replies, isn't a good thing to bring these lost souls? But if something's lost, it was once yours. If I have a watch, and I lost this watch, that's because that used to be my watch. So therefore, the language is critical here. Those who are returning or those who were lost. Who were these people? So these people were those generations. The generations of Jews who'd been absorbed into Egyptian society, and that was their purpose. Seduced by idolatry. Don't dismiss them. Don't think they were hopeless. Moshe doesn't dismiss them. Moshe feels sorry for them. He's done them like a scus because it was such a test, such a test as Rav Ashi was told by Menashe Melech Yisrael, you would have failed it. And they failed it. But Moshe wants to bring them back again. And of course, Hashem knows that. But that's the argument. That's why I'm bringing them back. I'd not give them another chance to come back. Rabbi Dessler in his Agodas, and now we're back to the Torah of Kelm. He says there, quoting the Arizal, an astonishing thing. He says the souls of Gerim are born from non-Jewish parents, are and usually exceptional people, because that soul was put into a non-Jewish womb, into non-Jewish home, non-Jewish parents, because they did something really bad. And he says this is the general formula for Gerim. As Jews in a previous generation, a previous incarnation, iteration perhaps, and now they have to fight to get back, to put that right, to fight to get back into Klal Yisrael, which one assumes they deserted in the first place. Now they have to fight to get back. And this is what he says on the Haggadah. So that's who these people were. The Chofetz Chaim, and Rabbi Yerucham, incidentally, was the Mashgiach, before he was the Mashgiach of Mir, was the Mashgiach of Radin. And the Chofetz Chaim was his Rebbe all of his life. And he says a beautiful thing, and I think it's a nice idea. You see, nobody is beyond hope. Even if your Din Torah in Shemaim is completely negative, Hashem will still look for a way or a someone like Moshe to allow you to come back again. Something Rabbi Dessler addresses elsewhere, which we don't really have time to go into. It's another possibility. And of course, in the Seder night, when it comes to karpas, right at the beginning of the story, we take something which grows in the ground, generally a potato, we dip it in salt water. Karpas backwards is perach, samach. Samach hint is, of course, numerical value at 60. That's the 600,000 Jews. But now from Egypt, perach means rigor. The Egyptians treated them rigorously, terribly, horribly. And as a consequence, we are taking the salt water, tears, and putting this in the ground, growing in the ground, into the water and eating it, making a bracha. Why do you take something from the ground? So I can't remember, my old Rebbe, Rabbi Yonah Balkan, used to say this. I think it's the from Haggadah Leil Shemurim, the Aruch HaShulchan's Haggadah. He says, because even if somebody has gone down to the earth, under the earth, is, as they say in Yiddish, licht and dreert, is filthy with sin the entire year, his history, his past, is verschmutzt, is a mess, there's still a hope that the Kedusha of Pesach, the Exodus, could bring you back again, just like the Erev Rav have a chance to come back again. And the Chofetz Chaim famously says, in the Devarim, when it says, Lo sira es shor achecha oy es siyo nedochim nesamanim, don't see your friend's cattle or his sheep nedochim, lost and directionless. You've got to bring them back again. Of course, there's a mitzvah to do exactly that. If your neighboring farm has one of his sheep or his cows have wandered away, you've got to bring it back. It's a mitzvah. But he says, so often the Torah refers, or throughout Tanakh, prophets refer to Klal Yisrael as being sheep, a flock. Hashem being the shepherd. Think of Tehillim. Hashem Roy Eloi Achsar, the most famous Tehillim of all. For some reason, the non-Jewish world likes it. The 23rd Psalm, the Lord is my shepherd. So we are the sheep. And therefore, he says, if you see a Jew getting lost and you don't bring them back, then you're going to be in big trouble. But if there are people who could bring them back, they must bring them back. If you've been given the ability to bring back those lost sheep, then you have to bring them back. And he said there are some people who have that ability. Roy Israel, they should be called the Roy, the shepherds of Israel, who bring back the lost sheep. Hashem, says Moshe Rabbeinu, didn't you say it was a good thing to bring back these lost souls? Isn't that a good thing to bring back? Bring back somebody who's been there before? That's who they were. Because in Seder night at Pesach, no matter how low you've got, there's something special about the time, about the event that permeates the world. It's easier to come back at Pesach than any other time. And there's also very important lessons to us, or for me anyway, in this little share. and that is the mitzvah of Don Lechaskus. Never rush to judge somebody. You just don't know until you're standing, as it says in Pirkei Avos, in their life, and know every element of the life, why they went off. When you judge somebody, you might just turn into a Ravashi who gets quite a telling off from somebody who appears to be a big Rosh Menashe Malchus, who incidentally became a Baal Tshuva at the end of his life. That you don't know what you're talking about. And there's always a way back, even if it's a very tough way. And even if it means coming back, being born into non-Jewish nations and having to fight to join the Jewish people again. So I hope that's some useful elements for you for Seder night. There'll be more next week. And I wish you all, of course, a very successful Shabbos, enjoyable Shabbos, and a successful rest of the week. Shabbos.